Hey guys, welcome to the Ad Astra podcast, the podcast where we integrate space, policy, and technology. I'm Jack.
And I'm Newton.
I have a Master's of Public Policy degree with a concentration in science and space policy.
And I'm a PhD in computer science and an all-around tech geek.
All right, before we forget, follow us on Twitter at @adastra_podcast, like us on Facebook, subscribe to our mailing list on elemental.fm to get regular updates from the team, and follow us on Instagram now too. Same handle as on Twitter. If you like what you hear, give us a review on iTunes and recommend us on Overcast. So before we get started on our topic today, Newton, would you like the honor of dedicating this episode?
So today, before we get started covering our usual, which is the latest in Washington, space news highlights of the week, international updates and latest in tech, we want to dedicate this episode to retired U.S. Colonel and former astronaut John Glenn Jr., as well as former Senator John Glenn Jr. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery on Thursday, April 6th, 2017. For those who don't know, he was the first American to orbit the Earth, setting NASA, the United States, and the West on a course from which it could not stray. He was our first to orbit the Earth, but he propelled us towards our future. So in our first story today, before we get to anything else, we'll go in depth about some of the achievements in his life and how he helped move us forward as a country. So to get started, John Herschel Glenn Jr., he was born July 18th, 1921 in Cambridge, Ohio, as the son of John Herschel Glenn Jr. and teacher Clara Teresa Sproat. He was raised in New Concord, Ohio, with his adopted sister Jean. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor and brought the United States into World War II, Glenn quit college to enlist in the U.S. Army Air Corps. But John was never called to duty in that respect. Instead, he enlisted in the Naval Aviation Cadet Program in March 1942, graduated from the program, and was commissioned in the Marine Corps in 1943. There, he joined Marine Fighter Squadron 155 and spent a year flying F-4U fighters in the Marshall Islands. During his World War II service, he flew 59 combat missions. He would go on to participate after the war in North China Patrol under Marine Fighter Squadron 218. He would also serve in Guam and fly 63 missions in Korea under Marine Fighter Squadron 311. So I think it's safe to say that the man loved flying. In July 1957, he set a transcontinental speed record from Los Angeles to New York, flying across the United States in 3 hours and 23 minutes. It was the first transcontinental flight to average supersonic speed. Glenn clocked nearly 9,000 hours of flying time over his life, a third of which was done in jet aircrafts, which is not an easy task for our pilot fans out there. In April 1959, after being selected as a Project Mercury astronaut, Glenn was assigned to the NASA Space Task Group at Langley Research Center. The Space Task Group was moved to Houston in 1962 to become a part of the NASA Manned Spacecraft Center. On February 20th, 1962, Glenn piloted the Mercury Atlas 6 Friendship 7 spacecraft. This was the first manned orbital mission of the United States. Launched from Kennedy Space Center in Florida, he completed a successful 3-orbit mission around the Earth. The craft, reaching an altitude of approximately 162 miles, and it reached an orbital velocity of approximately 17,500 miles an hour. There were 11 delays during the countdown due to equipment malfunctions, improvements to equipment functioning properly, and the weather. One of these malfunctions was actually highlighted recently in the recent movie Hidden Figures. During Glenn's first orbit, a scheduled 30-minute test to see if he could fly the spacecraft manually became significant when a failure of the automatic control system was detected at the end of the first orbit. This forced Glenn to operate in manual mode for the second and third orbits and re-entry. Mission duration from launch to landing was 4 hours, 55 minutes, and 23 seconds. The craft plopped into the sea, roughly 800 miles southeast of Kennedy Space Center. Glenn flew this mission in 1962, as well as STS-95 in 1998. STS-95 flew from October 29th to November 7th, 1998. Glenn was 77 years old when he flew STS-95, making him the oldest person to fly in space. All in all, he logged over 218 hours in space. Between those missions, Glenn ran for Senate in 1964 and again in 1970. He dropped out of the 64 race after being hospitalized for a concussion that rendered him unable to campaign. His family campaigned on his behalf, but he stated that because he didn't want to win on astronaut fame alone, he would drop out of the race. He was defeated when he ran again in 1970 in the Ohio Democratic Party primary. He garnered 49% of the votes that year, so it was 49 to 51. That prompted him to run again and win in 1974, which began a Senate career that would last until his retirement in February 1997. He received numerous honors over the course of his life, including the Presidential Medal of Freedom from one President Barack Hussein Obama in 2012. Glenn was in good health most of his life, even retaining a private pilot's license well into his 80s, which I hope I could do someday.
Even get a pilot's license in the first place.
That's the start. Give it a couple years. He retained a private pilot's license well into his 80s when he eventually quit flying when he and his wife found it too difficult to get into the cockpit due to knee problems. Glenn underwent successful heart valve replacement surgery at the Cleveland Clinic in 2014, but his health had been declining until his death on December 8th, 2016. No cause of death has been disclosed as of yet. Glenn lived to be 95 years old. The man is a national treasure and will always be remembered.
95.
95 years old.
Been to space twice. And he was the first, I don't know if our listeners know this, was the first elected member of Congress to fly.
Yeah.
In space.
That's amazing.
He was the first astropolitician, you could say.
My God.
So there were two members of Apollo who also became politicians. But Glenn, I think, was the politician or astronaut who came to most prominence, serving close to 25 years or 20 years.
It's so it was 1974 until
to 99,
98. Well, yeah, 97. Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, think about being the first American. I mean, granted, it wasn't the first human being, whatever, Yuri's Night, right?
Yeah, Yuri's Night is coming up.
Yuri's Night is coming up.
Actually, I think this episode will air on Yuri's Night.
But I mean, just to be able to say that, you're first in country when you and the Soviet Union are the only ones doing it, to test out your country's technology, in such a risky way. I mean, but it was obviously characteristic of him. I mean, the man flew, hundreds of military missions. The guy was just incredible.
Well, there's a reason why military pilots were the first astronauts.
Right.
I mean, these were the people that were, daring in all aspects. I mean, if you look at all of the Apollo astronauts, Gemini and Mercury, I can't really think of one that wasn't in the military at some point. And most of them were pilots.
And I mean, people say that because we did this because we were in the Cold War and we want to send military people. But a good chunk of the reason is, I mean, the bravery that was extorted by someone like John Glenn. I mean, not that a civilian can't have the same thing, but I mean, it was tested in multiple wars. It was
scientifically proven bravery.
Right. He was the definition of the right stuff for these kinds of missions.
Yeah, I mean, so if anyone has a chance to read Howard McCurdy's book, Space and the American Imagination, there's a whole chapter on the the Mercury program that talks about this, that the Mercury 7 astronauts, the first 7 people picked to go into space for the United States in this space race, they embodied, at least their public persona embodied, everything that was American. Red-blooded, God-fearing, commie butt-kicking, badass pilot astronauts. I mean, they were the 2 kids and a dog, white picket fence that everyone sort of aspired to. They were the, every Boy Scout growing up wanted to be John Glenn.
Absolutely.
Every Boy Scout growing up wanted to be Neil Armstrong. And I mean, that is what, I would even say contributed to our success in the Cold War. I mean, of course, there's the technological side of it. There's also the geopolitical side of it.
The other side's economy collapsing, and
there's some confounding variables there. But I think a lot of what drove the will of the American people to support the space program when they did, and to support funding for the program, and even within the program, what drove the scientists and engineers to come to work every day was, we're putting John Glenn up in space. Like, this isn't something we can screw up.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to end this sort of in memoriam to John Glenn with 3 quotes from his lifetime. These are handpicked by me, but they just kind of give you an idea of who he was. The first: the most important thing we can do is inspire young minds and to advance the kind of science, math, and technology education that will help youngsters take us to the next phase of space travel. When he was asked by CNN about what can we do to improve our future in space. The second quote, this one's well known. It has been my observation that the happiest of people, the vibrant doers of the world, are almost always those who are using, who are putting into play, calling upon, depending upon the greatest number of their God-given talents and capabilities. And the third quote, and probably the most important one: the best space movie in my view is Apollo 13. That's just the way it happened.
Yeah. I would, if I can tack on my favorite Glenn quote, might be the quote that inspired me to go into public policy. At least that's what I'll say in this episode.
Sure.
Is, to me, there is no greater calling. If I can inspire young people to dedicate themselves to the good of mankind, I've accomplished something.
Yep.
I mean, it's his vision and his legacy that inspires us every day. So I guess to sign off on this, Godspeed, John Glenn.
Godspeed. Ad Astra.
Ad Astra.
All right. Time to move on to the latest in Washington. Jack, take it away.
All right. Well, really, it is a latest from Colorado this week. So the major things that happened policy-wise in the last week all sort of happened at the 33rd Space Symposium, something that you and I talked about last week that our listeners need to take a look at. So if you haven't done your homework and watched all 200 hours of content that was produced, there were some pretty notable things that happened in Colorado. First off, Representative Mike Rogers from Alabama put out a call for there to be a Space Corps. As much as there is a Marine Corps in the Navy, he wants a Space Corps in the Air Force. And this sort of follows the same trajectory as the Air Force overall. I mean, it began as the Air Corps, right? I think they called it the Air Corps within the Army during World War II. And in 1947, the Air Force Act was passed in Congress, and it not only did it create the Department of Defense as we know it today, but it also created the Air Force to take all of our air assets and put them under a force, which that revolutionized, organizationally speaking, or revolutionized how we as a nation fought wars from then on.
But he wants this one within the Air Force, right?
Yeah, so he's not calling for there to be a Space Force quite yet. although that has been a call on Capitol Hill because the importance of space on the future of warfare is growing exponentially every year. I mean, it seems every year, almost every month, there's something new that happens where it just drives this need for there to be a fully autonomous section of the military that deals with space. I mean, all of the branches and all of the corps within them have space contingents. So there are space Marines. Granted, they're a bunch of nerdy, radio kids. Heads. I'm just imagining radar from MASH. But I mean, there are space Marines. But there is a need emerging to centralize all this within at least something within the Air Force.
I mean, it's almost like we need some sort of joint space operations center.
We will get to that in a minute.
All kidding aside, it's hard to see that and not think he's talking about space war. Am I wrong there?
Yeah, I mean, he's saying we need to be prepared for space war.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, you could have a very loose definition of space. You could include cyberspace within a space corps.
Really?
Sort of. Well, I mean, a lot of our cyber capabilities depend on satellites.
Yeah, but
and depend on space assets, and it's cyberspace.
Oh, okay.
there is an argument to centralize all of these sort of non-tangible mediums of conflict that the United States has already seen signs that we'll see conflict in the next 20 years, especially in the cybersphere, to sort of beef up their resilience by giving them their own budget and autonomy to do the research and development they need to develop the capabilities that they might need in the next 20 years, because we don't want to have another surprise like we did in 1957 with Sputnik.
Right, but that part of that's what organizations like US Cybercom are now for. Like, they have sectioned that off at least for cyber. I think
there used to be a Spacecom. It
Really?
no longer exists anymore.
When was there a Spacecom?
It was a while ago.
Okay.
I think it was through the mid 2000s.
Okay. Interesting.
But so there's sort of these, I guess, for the listeners. I mean, I don't even think the military necessarily understands how they differentiate everything up into commands and forces and corps.
So a part of it really is the needs of the organization that it's under. I mean, Air Force, Air Force has a segment of the Air Force. Actually, it is JICSpOC that focuses on space operations with a focus on the needs of the Air Force. And I do believe the same exists for the Army and definitely for the Navy. Naval space operations, something. I don't recall all the acronyms for those. Where you can sometimes run into trouble here is thinking that by centralizing everything, you're going to make it more efficient, when in reality, sometimes you can add on just additional layers of bureaucracy. And particularly when it comes to military missions and the proprietary nature of some of those missions, it's very hard to have individual organizations with visibility into all programs that run across Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, without significantly reducing efficiency, which is why in many cases these folks like this paradigm of, I just have a space organization attached to my organization to meet my needs.
So it's more as an augment on their current operations, as opposed to, oh, this is a whole other section of DoD that I have to deal with now
Right.
to meet my needs. But at the same time, you don't necessarily need everything centralized. I mean, the Navy doesn't depend on the Air Force when it needs an aircraft. I mean, the Navy has its own batch
Right.
of aircraft. The Army does as well. Looking at missile defense, I mean, there's the, within the Army, there's that. And then basically the Air Force has their missile sort of subset, and defense subset. The Navy sort of has their thing. I mean, it's not that they would centralize everything. It's that the decision-making, the top-level decision-making within a Space Corps is a lot more centralized than what we have now, where you might have the Army investing, 1% of their budget towards space capabilities. The Air Force might devote 10%. The Navy might devote 0%. And then there's sort of a disjointedness between the Army, Navy, and the Air Force now, where, say, the Navy needs to utilize the Army's space program, and they're running two different versions of software. I mean, it can go down to such a small level that they might miss some key steps in this whole thing. So centralizing these big decisions could have payoffs later on down the road, organizationally speaking. And that's sort of what Mike Rogers is getting at, which I don't agree with him on much, but I guess I sort of agree with him on that we sort of need to start progressing our space capabilities towards eventually maybe even having a space force, depending on how necessary we think it's going to be in the future. I mean, if in 20 years, anti-satellite ASAT capabilities are completely, banned by the Geneva Convention or whatever, or there's no threat whatsoever to space war, then we don't need a space force. But the direction that we see things going with rogue states and non-state actors sort of developing not space capabilities, but anti-space capabilities, jamming devices, HANS, high altitude nuclear detonations, which is a major concern for the Air Force, I know, that making sure that we can have sort of a counter to that and continue developing so that we're ahead of the curve.
Mm-hmm.
So again, we're not running into a 1957 situation where we're taken, by surprise by some launch of a new satellite, or we lose all military communications because, North Korea detonated a nuclear weapon in the upper atmosphere. That's sort of where this idea of a space corps is coming from, is sort of, let's start moving along the paradigm that we've sort of set for how a new medium becomes integral to our national defense. So how the Air Force came into being, how missile defense came into being, how cyber command came into being, sort of following those same steps, and then sort of seeing where you are at certain milestones. Now, what those milestones are still up for debate. Is it every 5 years we reassess our needs in space, or is it an ongoing process every year, or what's in an annual budget cycle?
Event. I don't mean necessarily an attack, but there might be a triggering event. For instance, if we see a certain nation state gain certain specific capabilities, where we view it as in the nation's national security interests to do this, as it would have to be a very clear reason to do it. It's hard for me to see us doing this just because we're saying that there's a potential that a threat could one day come. I know we spend a lot on DoD, but I think that doing this in a way that is a bit more focused will lead us to not developing another massive department that maybe shouldn't have necessarily existed. I'm speaking of one in particular that I'm not going to say on the air, but I can see the need for it. when exactly we would want to pull the trigger on that, I'm still hazy on.
Yeah, I mean, I will agree with you there that we shouldn't, solely develop a space corps or even go full-fledged space force, in the next year because we think that maybe in 5 years we're going to face some threat.
Also,
I think there needs to be. I think
would
there.
that be? Right? Like,
Well, then you get into, what does the Outer Space Treaty cover? I mean,
right.
that could be. I want to have an episode on that. What even is the Outer Space Treaty?
Right.
Because it's very. I mean, that thing was written in 1967. I mean, we just said Yuri Gagarin flew in 1961.
Right.
Like 6 years into humans in space, and we already had a treaty.
Yeah.
And then nothing after. I mean, there was the Moon Treaty, but.
And then who knew we'd be frenemies with Russia after that? That's
exactly. I mean, in 1967, I mean, people thought that, the world could end the next day, let alone what the year 1992 was going to bring.
Yeah.
So I think I agree with you in that we need to be very deliberate and thoughtful in our sort of moving forward with a space corps or space force. But I also agree with Rogers when I say that we are eventually going to need one. So we need to start making, if it takes, a couple studies, or if we do, call on GAO to do an analysis of current existing programs or something, to sort of start building an idea of what it would take to develop a space corps, to centralize all of our space assets within the Air Force, see just how much effort that would take, so that if we do come up to a threat in 2020 or 2025 where it turns out, ISIS captured some facility that has a couple nuclear weapons and they're able to launch it into, highly parabolic orbit or highly parabolic launch and take out all of our satellites. We want to be prepared for things like that, but not be so overly anxious about things that we end up causing another Cold War. I mean, it's sort of Rogers is, he's a Republican, he's a war hawk. Like it's one of those, he is stuck in that Cold War mindset of everybody's out to get us.
Right.
Let's build more bombs. And when it comes to our space assets, because not just the military, but every aspect of life on Earth is dependent on our space capabilities, I think there is an appropriate amount of we got to freak out now, but not quite yet. Not quite yet.
I mean, I obviously I think it's always a good idea to clearly be prepared, but I mean, we'll see where it goes. I mean, this was just a comment that was made at where was this? This was after the 33rd Space Symposium.
Yeah, okay. And it was at the policy workshop reception or something. It wasn't a huge. Sure. It wasn't like he was on the stage calling for a change in U.S. policy. I mean, he's saying like, this is something we need to think about. Yeah. Like this is something that like he's passionate about. I think he is a veteran of the Air Force. Like and I know Bridenstine, again, the presumptive nominee for NASA administrator is also very pumped about this as a veteran of the Air Force. But yeah, I think we shouldn't be too alarmed by them calling for a space corps. It should be something we think about. And I guess sort of in that same vein, there's an article that we're going to be linking not just only to Representative Rogers' statements, but also to an article basically saying that the House, a few members of the House leadership, Republican leadership, think that the Air Force is being really timid about reorganizing their structure, and especially in regards to their space portfolio. I know Heather Wilson, the presumptive new Secretary of the Air Force, who's still awaiting confirmation in the Senate, has been very big on, in her confirmation hearings, has mentioned space as an area that she wants to start looking into reorganizing. And it seems like every 2 years there's another reorganization of the Air Force.
Yeah.
Even just last year or 2015, October 2015, there was a PDSA, Principal DoD Space Advisor within the Air Force that was created, which Pete Hayes, if you're listening, this is a shout out to you. But yeah, I mean, like, there seems to be a reorganization of the Air Force every couple of years. And in regards to space, with all these sort of calls from Congress to take space more seriously, the Air Force is sort of reacting and saying, okay, I guess we do have to take it more seriously, but guys, let's not reorganize another time because that costs a lot of money. And really, are the benefits all that much greater if we're not really doing anything substantial anyway?
Right.
I mean, I think there needs to be some requisite funding for certain space related activities if we're going to reorganize the Air Force to be more space friendly. So let's talk about JICSpOC, or as they now are supposed to call it, NSDC.
NSDC.
It doesn't sound as cool as JICSpOC. So also at the 33rd Space Symposium, or no, this wasn't at the 33rd Space Symposium. This was just a meeting of the Joint Interagency Combined Space Operations Center, JICSpOC, where the top military brass, as the Space News article is calling them, announced that they are going to rename it to the National Space Defense Center. So I think, Newton, you could probably talk a little bit more to this.
So as far as JICSpOC is concerned, a lot of what they do has to do with monitoring. Just monitoring our satellite capabilities in orbit, kind of protecting things as they are in orbit. They ensure data fusion among DoD, the intelligence community. They have interagency information sharing, and this is kind of why I brought them up when we were discussing the previous article, because they're effectively the ones that are in charge of pulling together our space capabilities to help each agency do their job better. The SATCOM, and forms of intelligence I'm not going to talk about on this podcast, are a lot of those things are aided by JICSpOC and JICSpOC. So, I mean, this renaming, I didn't really see much in the article talking about why they're going through with the renaming, or really what significance it has. I mean, who is it? General John Hyten talked about it and stated that it's in coordination with our partners, and the point of this was to eliminate confusion and better describe its actual purpose, which it's national space defense, which makes sense, but it's not. It really doesn't give them a significantly different mission per se. It just renames it to discuss what they're actually doing. It's a less confusing title. But yeah, JICSpOC pulls together data and hands it out to a significant number of defense organizations, and they do things that we won't talk about here.
Yeah, or we can't talk about these things. So do you welcome this name change?
It's fine. Does
it really matter that much?
It really doesn't. And
I know the Space News article talks about how the name JICSpOC is close to JSpOC, and that it was a little confusing.
That always did confuse me, honestly. The fact that those two organizations were had very similar names, particularly when JICSpOC is very much concerned with the information fusion aspect, and JSpOC has been spending the last 3 years answering calls from commercial organizations who want to launch their cool new CubeSats in orbit.
And it's like, no, you got the wrong J acronym. Well, I mean, that's the thing in government acronyms, is you never know if it's an even more abbreviated acronym,
right,
or if it's actually a completely different agency.
Yeah. So
I mean, like that happens all the time. DoD, just get used to it. No, I think I agree with you that NSDC does sound a little. I think
It better
I wish you could
defines what they
pronounce
do.
it better,
Sure, I
but
think that's reasonable. But yeah, they should have had an actual acronym and not
yeah,
not an
that right there,
abbreviation.
that's an initialism.
Yeah, yeah,
Do you know
exactly.
that an acronym has to be pronounceable?
Yes, yes. That's
Yeah.
why like CIA or NSA is not an acronym, but NASA is.
No, CIA could be SIA.
CIA.
They came out with that new album pretty soon. All right, so let's. I think I'm gonna touch on this
Mhm.
for 1 second.
Yeah, we're
So
running. We're running out of time
we're
here.
we're running out of time.
Yeah.
Moon versus Mars.
Mhm.
I think it's Moon and Mars now. So I'm gonna publicly apologize to any Moon fans out there who I may have offended. The Lunatics, you're still on my shit list. But Moon fans, you're fine. With the Deep Space Gateway and Deep Space Transport, I think we can cohabitate in deep space, in cislunar space. We can go to Mars and go back to the moon potentially if the budget's there.
Yeah.
So I propose. This is my proposal
I have a
to the
bargain.
moon.
Jack has a bargain.
I have a bargain for the moon community. Join me on the hill, and we will. We want 20 billion in 2018 for NASA,
I think it's
and
reasonable.
I will agree to putting money towards a lunar lander, or at least some initial studies into it. That's about as far as I'll go. But we keep all the Mars programs on course, and we can talk about moon stuff. 20 billion in 2018. That's my proposal. Tweet at me at Jack_Corelli.
For me, by any means necessary, get the Deep Space Gateway built.
Yeah, no, that is
that's all I care about as far as moon goes.
That was the Space News highlight of last week.
Yeah.
And Newton, you have a Space News highlight of this week.
I do have a Space News highlight of this week because we need to get it moving. This was discussed in a press release on April 6th. For the first time ever, researchers have detected an atmosphere around a planet that is just a little bit larger than Earth. It's a planet that's very comparable to Earth in terms of size. So the planet is about 39 light years away. That's about 12 parsecs from Earth in the constellation called Vela. The exoplanet is called GJ 1132b, which orbits the dwarf star GJ 1132. Yeah, we're really original. It has the planet GJ 1132b has a radius of only about 1.4 times that of Earth's radius, and its mass appears to be about 1.6 times Earth's mass, according to this new study out of Kiel University. The team that made the discovery, the PI for that team, Dr. John Southworth, used a 2.2 millimeter ESO MPG, so European Southern Observatory, and Max Planck Gesellschaft. I butchered that seemingly German name.
That was so German.
Yeah.
I don't even think a German could
Yeah.
pronounce it.
But yeah, they use this 2.2 meter telescope that sits in Chile to take images of the planet's host star, and they use the common orbital velocity and wobble technique in order to identify the planet, and they were able to measure the slight decrease in brightness as the planet and its atmosphere absorbed some of the starlight while it was transiting in front of the host star. When the planet was first discovered, researchers called it a potential Venus twin because it's a rocky world with a very, very high surface temperature. And now they found that the planet and Venus might have a thick atmosphere in common too, which is kind of cool. This is the first evidence, like I said, of an atmosphere around an exoplanet that's near Earth size. And Dr. Southworth, said in his statement on April 6th, so that was Thursday, that whilst we're still a long way from detecting life on exoplanets, this discovery is the first step. An atmosphere is a key sign that there is complex chemistry that's going on a celestial body. So that's why this is extremely important. So as I said, the planet's really hot. The planet receives 19 times more stellar radiation than the Earth. The temperature of the top of its atmosphere is estimated to be about 500 degrees Fahrenheit, 260 degrees Celsius for our...
So DC in the summer.
Yeah, basically DC in the summer. I hope they have jazz in the garden at least. The planet's estimated to be hotter than Venus near the surface. It's possible that one side of the planet could be cooler. People have been saying that. I hate that phrase, but people are saying that. People have been saying. I'm moving my hands in that manner as well. But people have been saying that it may be cooler on the other side, but it doesn't really. It wouldn't really make sense for it to be cooler on the other side if it has a very thick atmosphere. But the reason they think it might be cooler is because it's presumed to be tidally locked due to its proximity to its star.
Just like the TRAPPIST-1 system.
Just like TRAPPIST-1, exactly. So yeah. This is it's an amazing discovery, and that's why we wanted to highlight it as Space News Highlight of the Week. This is just another step towards us finding planets that are fairly similar to the planets that we see in our solar system. And these kinds of discoveries help us understand, help us to gain an understanding of our part of the universe. Our part of the galaxy.
Our place in space.
Our place in space. by seeing other places that are fairly similar. This is a great spot to turn our telescopes and start taking a look at more information about that particular system, the GJ1132 system, and see what's common about it, what's not so common about it. How does it differ from ours? Very low mass stars in general are extremely common and are known to host lots of small planets, but typically they also show a lot of magnetic activity, causing high levels of X-rays and ultraviolet light, which basically evaporate most planets' atmospheres. This is going back to the discussion about Mars and its atmosphere, how a lot of it got stripped away due to our sun's ultraviolet light. But the properties of GJ1132b show that its atmosphere endured, this kind of light attacking it for more than 1 billion years without being destroyed, which is, that's an incredible discovery by this group in Chile.
I'm gonna say we need to call it the jelly system because GJ1132b.
How did I not see that?
It's the jelly system.
It is the jelly system.
That's what I'm going to call it now.
Yes.
But you said 12 parsecs. I think that is the distance.
Is that the Kessel Run?
That's the Kessel Run. That's the Kessel Run. So if only we had the Millennium Falcon.
God.
Everything goes back to Star Wars on this show.
He said he did it in 12 parsecs and not.
Yeah. Well, that technically that could actually work. I know there was a Vox article or something that detailed how you could theoretically do a unit of distance shorter.
Right, like I ran in 10 feet, like that.
Well, no, it'd be I ran a mile in 10 feet. Because the Kessel Run is theoretically a set distance between one point and another.
That's fair.
In the Star Wars universe, I think it's between the Kessel system and Quat, and I think it goes through the Big Maw. I don't know. Expanded universe shafted, so I'm not sure.
We're gonna have to do a special on the structure of the Star Wars universe at some point.
It's so interesting. I love Star Wars lore. I'm so excited this week. That should be our coming soon to space.
It really should be.
The Star Wars trailer coming out this week.
But so let's continue to move through this because we're slowly running out of time here. Once again, this was discovered by the MPG ESO 2.2 millimeter telescope. It's been in La Silla in Chile since 1984. It's it's a magnificent telescope. It's been used to make I'm just going to say a large series of discoveries for the sake of time. It sits at about an altitude of 2,335 meters. For more on the work done by the folks over at Kiel University and this discovery, we'll link it in the show notes, but they actually published their paper on it in the Astronomical Journal, volume 153, paper number 191. The title of the paper is "Detection of the Atmosphere of the 1.6 Earth Mass Exoplanet GJ 1132b."
Jelly system.
Jelly system. Research papers don't have the most creative titles. Okay, moving on to international updates. Jack, what do you
Everyone's
got for us?
favorite country,
AKA the China.
the China section. So, as I mentioned last week, the Chinese space program's administrator, I'm not sure exactly what the title is, Yulong Tian, talked about China's goals in space exploration. And he elaborated further at the 33rd Space Symposium in Colorado Springs, Colorado, where he talked about sort of in the next decade where they plan to see China. Mainly, the China National Space Administration wants to see themselves have at least 30 satellites by 2020. Providing global coverage using, with remote sensing capabilities on all of the satellites, doing meteorological, ocean and land monitoring, and I think also some space situational awareness, keeping track of what's in orbit, having 30 satellites by 2020. Following that, they want to develop plans to study Jupiter, Venus, and asteroids more closely, start flying more regularly on the Long March 7 rocket, having a permanently occupied space lab similar to the ISS, maybe not in size, but in purpose, having a space lab by 2022, and having a Mars lander and sample return by 2030.
I'm here
Very
for
ambitious.
it. I'm here for
Very ambitious. And I think, China is emerging as a leader in space. And I know the Mike Rogers and Trey Gowdies out there are clawing at their exoskeleton. I don't know what they have. There's sort of been this resurgence of almost a Red Scare, trying to say, oh, China's going into space, like this is the next Cold War, this is the next space race. And time again on the Ad Astra podcast, we say no. It is not another Cold War. Unless you make it that, unless the U.S. says, our administration and our military says we're going to make this another space race. I think we can learn a lot from the Chinese, and the Chinese can learn a lot from us. I think
the Chinese can learn a whole lot from us comparatively.
The whole Long March system, their premier launch service originated in the United States.
Right.
We helped them develop it over the years through the 70s and 80s, developing their space capabilities, because it's sort of this new diplomacy of, we can have our terrestrial squabbles and fight amongst, about international policy all we want. But in space, it's no one's domain. We need to work together if we're going to solve the pressing issues of humans exploring space.
I can break that down into one sentence. Space is hard enough.
Yeah,
we don't have to war with each other in space. Now, I'm not going to pretend that China hasn't had, kind of been had other competition with the US that makes technology development in certain domains dangerous. We all remember like the OPM hack and things like that, right?
Also think back to 2007. There was the ASAT test that contributed to about 25% of the material in space right now.
Right.
All the space, 25% of the space junk from one launch.
So they have to do it right, and it's preferred that they take these advancements in technology and use it to the good of their own country, as opposed to alternative uses against us.
well, you know, if our posture, if the United States' posture maintains a I want to like isolationist, you know, America first mentality, and doesn't embrace the, you know, internationally, culturally diverse, scientifically founded rationale behind these international partnerships that made the ISS a thing, and is making things like, you know, returning to the moon, going to Mars, making that possible. If the United States positions ourselves as sort of the antithesis of that, I mean, we then become the Soviets.
Yeah.
You know, we fall behind our own Iron Curtain, and we shut out the rest of the world while they're all, you know, playing on the jungle gym. It's as if we were playing on the jungle gym and scraped our knee, ran inside, and refused to go out and play with all the other kids because of what happened to us once.
Right.
You know, it's this mentality of sort of this America first mentality can get very dangerous. Now, I mean, we can talk about the America first budget all we want for, you know, 97 years, 9 more seasons, 97 years.
It's also not going to pass Congress. So I like,
it's also not going to pass Congress, but the mentality is still going to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And if we position ourselves in that, you know, we're aggressive towards potential collaborators and partners in space, then we're going to be the ones that fall behind.
Sure.
We have to embrace the culture and dynamic of the time if we're going to succeed. I mean, just like we did in the 1960s and 1970s, we embraced the culture of the time. And the culture of that time was, I mean, it was posture and, you know, pomp and circumstance, and make, you know, this America first mentality sort of worked then, and it fit the mold then. But to then take that and not address it as a model, but use it as a strategy, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like we're it doesn't fit today.
No, I see.
You know, we have to develop a strategy for you know, moving forward in space for today, that works for today, that works on the international partnerships that we've built.
I think you're talking about a long-term plan.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, like I think long-term.
Yeah.
I mean, this is partnering with China could be prosperous for generations, for 100 years.
I think to some extent, I would like to see us partner with China only in smaller capacities. I would like to see them build up their technology capabilities alongside a few other nations so that we can focus on our own missions. China is very lunar focused, right? That's like that's they're very LEO and very lunar focused, and I think that it would be nice if they did, you know, start to take the lead in terms of building infrastructure for that part of space, and that we took the lead in terms of going beyond. I think that's if you had to pick one, right? Obviously, I would like to see us help with all of it and lead all of it. And I'm not saying that we exclude ourselves from the Chinese journey into space, but I think that their goals as far as what they want to do in space slightly differ from ours, and we just have to be mindful of that.
Work with them when it's convenient for both of us.
Yeah, when it's in our national interest.
We shouldn't. Yeah, when it goes out of our. I mean, again, going back to this idea of models and strategies that fit the models. My theory, the Apollo formula of it's a formula that's relative to the time in which it's being deployed. You have to sort of fit the mold. and you always have to fit within your own national priorities. So when it's convenient for us and convenient for them, we need to be working together.
Yeah.
I mean, if they come up to a problem and say how they get their humans to survive in space, I mean, we should help out. Like, we know how to do that.
And for the sake of science, you help out because solving problems across, addressing the same issue in multiple environments in different ways actually enhances science and technology overall. So
yeah, I mean, because we haven't had to deal with some of the problems that they're dealing with now in 30, 40 years.
Sure, yeah.
So like we sort of have maybe forgotten our roots. We've forgotten where we came from in that respect.
Gotta get back to our
roots. So helping them develop their systems and their capabilities will inevitably help us, and allows us to keep, our sort of our cadence going.
Right.
We don't have to slow down our development because of another country. I mean, this is like, space is non-partisan. There's no borders. It's
not yet. No, I'm just kidding.
Not yet.
God, I hope not.
No, there's no outer space treaty. You cannot claim sovereignty of any land that isn't on the Earth. No celestial body.
Okay.
That did, Antarctica, but that follows the same formula, and Antarctica is broken up into 6 or 7 countries at this point.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I say let's help the Chinese. Let's develop a international community of scientists and engineers whose sole purpose is to expand human presence in the solar system and beyond.
Awesome.
So let's do a quick latest in tech.
Okay. Well, I'm going to try to make this quick. So what we're going to highlight this week in latest in tech, NASA invests in 22 visionary exploration concepts is the name of the title of this article.
Ooh, tell me more.
So NASA just approved 22 proposals under its 2017 Innovative Advanced Concepts Program. This is the NASA Innovative Advanced Concepts Program, or NIAC, if you will. See, NASA does acronyms. This program will cover a wide range of innovations selected for their potential to revolutionize future space exploration. The program focuses on early studies of what are supposed to be these visionary concepts that addresses NASA's or the nation's goals, but also offer radically different approaches or innovations to enable new missions or greatly enhance previous ones. It's a bit like a DARPA effort. It's high risk, high reward. You don't know if it's going to work. But if it does, it's going to change history. Right. It's NASA kind of behaving as its cousin, DARPA.
It's in the upper right corner of the risk matrix.
Yeah, exactly.
I think
exactly. So,
see, I know some government slang.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, the NIAC defines its concepts as far term, but worth studying now to inform NASA's investments and planning, basically. The entry technology readiness level, or TRL, for NIAC Phase 1 concepts should be TRL 2 or lower. So this Phase 1 is going to be for 9 months, and each of these proposals are valued at approximately $125K or less. And like I said, they'll be TRL 2 or lower, and we'll get to that in a second. Successful studies should analyze a mission that could be made feasible with the proposed concept, with what each of these entities propose. And proposals must demonstrate innovation, have clear potential impact in transforming future missions, employ a strategic technical approach for study, and demonstrate other non-technical benefits. To go back for a second, I've gone over TRL's technology readiness levels before, but that podcast may not have made it out. That episode may not have made it out.
That one is definitely a lost episode.
Yeah, okay, that one's a lost episode. And you guys should really be listening to the latest episodes anyway.
You don't need to hear those early
no,
ones.
you don't. No. But this is something that the public doesn't necessarily have a lot of insight to, so I'll just cover it real quick. A TRL, or technology readiness level, it's an estimate of how mature a technology is. So DoD, NASA, ESA, other organizations each have their own scale for this sort of thing, and I'm used to DoD, but we'll actually have to adjust to NASA fairly soon. But in all honesty, they don't strike me as extremely different. Their TRL scales, they both range from TRL 1 through 9, with 1 typically being, reporting basic principles or observations, like in a technical paper that you publish to a conference, right? Or that in reality you publish to your agency and they decide whether or not they're going to fund more research. Um, it's typically some analysis that's a small proof of technological viability. In TRLs 2 and 3, you start to form and characterize a proof of concept of the technology. 4 and 5 are really they're really focused in testing components in laboratory and relevant environments. 6 and 7 are about testing a full usable system model and prototype in relevant environments. In NASA's case, that relevant environment is often space, like on the ISS or so on and so forth, and or in a vacuum chamber. And then in 8 and 9, you see the actual technology, the actual system, through significant testing and multiple operations, respectively, within the operating environment. Once again, in space. I just wanted to take a quick break and run through that. I think it's important for people to know that the different levels at which you can be conducting research and developing some new capability for organizations like NASA. Okay, and NASA, DARPA, DOE, etc. have programs that span each of those levels. DARPA's mostly TRL 1 through 5, and they transition technologies to other government organizations so they can move up the chain. But anyway, you get the point. So, with that said, what you guys have really been waiting to hear, we have the list of the 2017 Phase 1 approved proposals for NIAC. And we'll walk through some of these. And I'm going to steal greatly from descriptions that I've found on NIAC's website. So just, go to nasa.gov and look for NIAC's website, and there are at least abstracts describing some of these technologies. I'm going to try and run through them as quickly as I can because I think we're already at the hour mark.
Yeah, we are above an hour.
Yeah.
And we still have one segment and the coming soon segment.
Okay, so I'll just go through these for a few minutes. So, to give you an example, a synthetic biology architecture to detoxify and enrich Mars soil for agriculture. This is talking about basically using synthetic biology in order to create an environment where we can do things like grow food, grow supplies for space missions, so on and so forth.
Hint at our listener submitted query.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, if they do not name if there is a technology that's developed from that, if the acronym for that is not WATNI, I'm going to write my member of Congress to defund the NIAC program.
Well, talk to Adam Arkin at University of California, Berkeley for that.
Yeah, I'll tweet at him.
Over at JPL in Pasadena, California, the next proposal is called a breakthrough propulsion architecture for interstellar precursor missions. They're proposing a new power propulsion architecture to enable missions such as a 12-year flight time to 500 AU, the distance at which solar gravity lensing can be used to image exoplanets with conventional spacecraft. The architecture would enable orbiter missions to Pluto with the same size spacecraft in just 3.5 years, as opposed to the 9-year journey that we had previously. I actually like this one because they actually listed how they're doing this, what their architecture is, and it's actually fairly straightforward. they're going to be using a 10-kilometer diameter, 100 milliwatt laser array that beams power across the solar system, a 70% efficient photovoltaic array tuned to the laser frequency, producing power at 12 kilovolts, and a 70 milliwatt direct drive lithium based ion propulsion system with a specific impulse of 58,000 seconds. So basically, they're going to use a space-based laser beam to fire light at a spacecraft with a photovoltaic array. It's simple, but it should work. And I believe Breakthrough Star is planning on a longer but similar plan. Breakthrough Star is the group that's trying to send a less than gram spacecraft all the way to Alpha Centauri.
That's the Stephen Hawking project,
that's
correct?
Stephen
With
Hawking.
Mark Zuckerberg
Yep.
and that Russian guy.
I don't remember the Russian guy's name, but Hawking and Zuckerberg are the only ones that I knew that I remember or care about. Moving on, evacuated airship for Mars missions. By John Paul Clark at Georgia Institute of Technology. This one's cool. I'll be brief. It's basically a vacuum airship. The concept is similar to a standard balloon, but whereas a balloon uses helium or hydrogen to displace air and provide lift for the balloon, a vacuum airship simply uses a very rigid structure to maintain a vacuum to displace air and provide lift. So you're going to host a vacuum within the structure. Just imagine a balloon, but not filled with anything. Let's see. We'll go through a few more. Mach effects for in-space propulsion interstellar mission by Heidi Fearn at Space Studies Institute in Mojave, California. Oh yeah, she didn't provide a very good description, so I actually had to look some of this up in my show notes. I'll explain this one really briefly because this one's actually interesting. They're proposing to study the implementation of an innovative thrust-producing technology for use in NASA missions involving in-space main propulsion. It's called Mach effect thruster propulsion. The Mach effect thruster is a propellantless space drive, which uses Mach's principle to produce thrust in an accelerating material which is undergoing mass and energy fluctuations. And we all know what Mach's principle is, am I right?
Yes.
Don't worry, I had to look it up too. So Mach's principle is a statement that basically what it says is that the inertia of a body is the result of the gravitational interaction of that body with the rest of the mass energy in the universe. The MET device would only require electric power of 100 to 200 watts to operate. And the thrust produced by these devices at the present time they're only on the order of a few micronewtons, but that's why this project exists, to give you an idea. This is something that's highly theoretical, but if they can prove that they can actually create a drive that can have propulsion based off of this, you've sort of taken that principle to the extreme. It's shown that if Mach's principle is taken seriously and the inertia of a body can be described as the interaction of the body with the rest of the universe, then the advanced and retarded fields transmitted between the particle or the material or the apparatus and the rest of the universe can be used to explain the thrust observed in the Mach effect drive experiments. The idea of inertia being a gravitational effect was first postulated by Einstein. And in fact, Mach's principle was the foundation on which general relativity was based. So now I feel dumb for not knowing that.
Well, you're not the only one in this conversation.
All right, let's do a few more. What are we at now? We're at like one. No, we got time.
Let's do one more.
Yeah, let's do one more.
Our listener submitted query.
Yeah, we'll do one more. And once again, you guys can find the link for each of these under our show notes at elemental.fm/@astra. We will do this one's actually pretty neat. The Pluto Hop, Skip, and Jump by Benjamin Goldman at Global Aerospace Corporation in Irwindale, California. This is a lander that can hop around on Pluto. Basically, after making science measurements at its initial landing site, the lander switches to a hopper mode it takes advantage of the low gravitational acceleration and a little bit of a propellant to literally hop, skip, and jump around on the surface, sometimes kilometers at a time, investigating different features of interest. So instead of sending something to do a flyby and take a bunch of pictures, or sending a lander to move around on the surface, just take advantage of its low gravity and literally hop around. The concept would enable in situ surface science at Pluto with low overall mass, a reasonable cost, and a time frame of about 10 to 15 years. This could be used as a model for exploring other dwarf planets or smaller bodies out in the exosolar system, as well as potentially for larger asteroids, although asteroids may have too low of a gravitational pull to do this. So
yeah, you don't want to hit escape velocity before you even
exactly get
to a second sight.
So but yeah, and like I said, there are others in here. We'll list them in the show notes. Different crazy concepts like analyzing the asteroid belt to start a gold rush in space. Exploring
Peter Diamandis is watering.
I know, right?
That prospect.
Solar
Planetary
surfing,
resources.
Solar surfing, which is basically what the Planetary Society has done with the light sail, just on steroids.
Did you know that the Planetary Society is the world's largest space advocacy organization?
I didn't know that, Jack.
Founded by Carl Sagan in 1980.
Who leads them now? Who's the?
It's this guy William Nye.
Interesting.
Yeah. He calls himself Bill. He looks more like a William to me.
I wonder if he'll be in the DC area soon. More on that later.
Coming soon.
Yeah, but lots of cool lots of cool ones. Oh, one more: a direct probe of dark energy interactions with a solar system laboratory. That one is actually pretty cool. But I'll leave you guys to read that. Let's get moving on to listener submitted queries.
So this question comes from Joanne Pierce, member of the Planetary Society and all-around superstar.
What a coincidence.
And we both happen to know her. So Joanne asks, how do we store food for a Mars mission? And I'm going to extend that and say, how do we store food in space? And for how long?
So who did I have a conversation? Did I have a conversation with you about this previously?
I feel like this is a conversation you and I would have.
Yeah, because I was having this conversation and talking about, you have to be able to grow food if you are going to have missions like the one to Mars, or if you're going to go any further than that, or if you're going to even have, potentially if you're going to have the Deep Space Gateway, you have to have some way of reproducing food. But I also think that in the tradition of NASA, I think we're going to approach the food problem in two thrust areas. The first is growing food, figuring out a habitat to grow food in space. We might use the Deep Space Gateway as our experimental platform for that, to bring it up to like a TRL 7 or 8. And I think that it's clear that we're going to attempt that in many different ways, potentially using synthetic biology to provide the bacteria and whatnot necessary for growing food, and even providing the chemistry necessary to sustain plant life in space, right? So I think that one is an area that we know that we need to focus on. The other area is storage. Being able to port a massive amount of food, or smaller things like pills or freeze wrapped, not too heavy without water types of food. That's a very scientific explanation of that. I know.
Not very much water.
Not very much waters. Then,
well, I mean, because remember, you're in space. There's a very finite amount of resources you have.
Right.
I mean, this might not be the biggest challenge NASA has to deal with, but it is could inhibit a long duration stay at the moon,
right,
on Mars, beyond.
And I think where it leaves you is it leaves you in a place where water is such a crucial resource to you, because I mean that is how a lot of these things are going to become edible for human beings. Whether you're talking about the food storage issue or the food growth issue, water is sort of your number one resource. Aside from just being able to drink it, you need to be able to use it to use the bathroom. You need to be able to feed these plants it so that they can grow and that you can that you can harvest them, and you have to be able to use it on the massive amount of freeze-dried foods that you've carried with you in order to eat those foods as well. So water and the use of water, the recycling of water, which we have become fairly good at, like recycling water on to the best of my knowledge. We've at least in space, when folks use the bathroom, and we're able to actually go through, clean that water and recycle it and recycle a good chunk of it as drinking water. I think we've become I think we've sort of maybe not mastered the art of that, but we've gotten pretty good at it. And I think that's going to come into play significantly. But it will be the number one resource that we need for doing any of this.
Yeah, I mean, water is life.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, so a couple of weeks ago, I went to a talk at the National Academies of Science here in DC by Dr. Kevin Hand over at JPL.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
And he was talking about sort of our former conception of the habitable zone being determined solely based on distance from a star.
I've heard him give this talk.
Yeah. It's a great talk.
It is a great talk.
Highly, if you can find it online or see him in person, he is wonderful. Yeah. I think his handle is @AlienOceans. Tweet at him. Tell him I sent you.
He has the best justification for why we need to do planetary science that I've ever heard anyone give. So.
Yeah. But so anyway, so he talks about how our conception of the habitable zone was originally linked solely to this idea that so long as you were a certain distance from a star, it was almost guaranteed that you were habitable.
Right.
Which, I mean, we still sort of use that paradigm today. I mean, looking at the TRAPPIST-1 system, that's why they say there are 3 planets within the habitable zone. That's a bit archaic at this point. What Kevin Hand talks about, and he can, of course, talk more about it, is water being the catalyst for life. It doesn't necessarily have to be only a certain distance from a star. He points to Europa, where the temperatures in the there's about 100 kilometers of ice, correct?
Yeah.
Or 30 kilometers of ice.
It's like near that.
100. Yeah. Fact check me on this. Yeah. But there's an ice sheet, and then hundreds of kilometers of water underneath that, under the surface of Europa. And it's allowed to stay in its liquid form and produce energy by the
15 to 25 kilometers thick. Sorry.
15 to 25 kilometers thick. And then I think it's 100 kilometers of water.
The ocean's about 60 to 150. We don't know. 60 to 150 kilometers thick. Which
for everybody at home, Earth's oceans are only about 30 kilometers deep. Yeah. 20 kilometers deep.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a huge ocean. There is more water on Europa than there is on planet Earth. And because of the tidal motion underneath the surface, because it's in Europa is orbiting Jupiter, because of the motion of the currents, the water, it maintains a temperature that could sustain life and could sustain the chemical reactions necessary to facilitate life on the planet. So water is integral to our known understanding of life. And even if there are things out there that don't need water to survive, we need water to survive.
Yeah.
And everything we know needs water to survive. And the other problem, though, with food in space is the storage thing. We kind of have that figured out. I mean, there's no refrigeration or freezer so far on the ISS or in any future plans of space stations or gateways or transports. But there is freeze drying things on the surface and sending them up. Now, that only lasts so long, and you need items that are going to take up the least amount of space, but provide the most number of calories. It's a calories per square inch or per cubed inch.
It's not space,
problem.
It's mass, by the way.
Mass, whatever. Calories per unit of mass. And so I was doing some reading on this. Sandra Magnus, who is part of Expedition 18, she was the flight engineer, which that was back in October 2008 when they went up to the space station, somewhere around then. And she wrote In Praise of Tortillas, which got me thinking.
I remember this.
Space burritos. I'm going to say, I think we should, and we need to tweet this out too. This is mental note for me and for our listeners, to tweet to Chipotle and tell them to develop a space burrito. We'll give them the contract. That's me. I will give them my contract to develop a space burrito, because I mean, again, it's a maximizing the amount of calories you can have in a given
it's funny
amount of mass.
I was just having a conversation right before this at a work happy hour where they were talking about how DARPA should fund the 0-calorie pizza. I'm over both of these conversations.
Space burritos and 0-calorie pizza is the takeaway from this conversation. But yeah, I mean, like I think this needs to be looked at, because there's also the psychological benefit of food.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
you could have protein pills and vitamin pills, till you die, but it's not going to give you the same level of sustenance or homeliness feeling.
Yeah.
I don't know what the right word for that is, but like feeling, you're eating something that's familiar.
I feel like with that said, I feel like there should also be sort of a bar room on a shuttle that's going to Mars where you have absolutely no interaction with the rest of the ship. Like you're just like you have to be locked in that room. If you're talking about
Martinez,
pleasure,
this is your daily timeout.
Right.
You have to go to the bar.
You go to the bar. You can have a couple drinks on your way to Mars, and you're not allowed to interact with the rest of the ship.
Unless mission critical.
And
mission critical does not include needing another drink, though.
And I don't know what would be good. What would be great bar food in space either, or great drunk food in space. I don't think you can have great drunk food in space.
Yeah, you can't really fry anything.
Yeah.
In space, And also, I mean, we should talk a little bit about adult beverages, alcohol in space. I mean, that's one of those homely foods. I mean,
it's good to have wine with dinner. I mean, it just is.
Like it, and there might be. I mean, I know with red wine, there's the antioxidants and health benefits that people proclaim it has. I mean, there very well could be some sort of benefit in terms of counteracting some of the effects of space.
It's a psychological benefit. It is.
Yeah.
Like that, and I think that's something that we should take seriously. I mean, maybe not necessarily maybe it doesn't have to be alcohol in space, but I mean, that's kind of a nice to have. And if you figure out how to do it and do it well, I mean, I think that it's something that we should at least consider. I mean, we're talking about 3 years of someone's life.
Your meal in space will be provided by Chipotle, and your drinks in space will be provided by Ardbeg. They actually have brewed scotch in space, though technically it wouldn't be scotch then, because it's not brewed in Scotland.
Buzz Aldrin drank a glass of wine in space, by the way.
He did, but that was for communion.
Was it?
Yeah, but it was white wine.
Huh.
It was white wine, but I think it was because he's Catholic. I'm fairly certain it was someone in the Catholic Church okayed it. They said, "Oh, that's fine. It was white wine. You were on the moon. Like doesn't matter." But I mean, that's those are some things to think about. Joanne, I hope that answered your question. If you have any follow-ups, of course you know where to find us at basically every hour of the day.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess that is going to wrap up our listener submitted queries. I think the last thing we want to talk about before we hit the hour and 30-minute mark on this episode, we just keep getting longer and longer in these episodes.
I know. There's so much to talk. Stuff keeps happening.
Stuff keeps happening in space. We need to call NASA and tell them to stop being so productive.
Slow it down and get your head in the grind. Like
slow it down. Be like DOD or something.
Yeah, focus on what you have.
NASA, stop making these great technological innovations and scientific discoveries. We can't take it anymore.
Talking about space lasers and propelling ships all over the place. Jesus.
Jeez. I remember back in my day when we had we only had one Mars rover.
I know, right? And that ran on Java. I actually forget the one that ran on Java, but it did run on Java, and it had an error that had to be fixed while I was taking my sophomore year Java class. I thought that was pretty funny.
So what you're saying is you could have fixed. Was that Sojourner?
I think it was Sojourner that had the. I'll figure that out. That's for next show. I'll bring it up on the next show because now I'm kind of curious.
That would have been Sojourner.
Yeah,
I don't think Pathfinder was on Java.
I'll bring it up on the next show.
Yeah. All right. So last segment.
Yeah.
Well, last mention, I guess. Coming soon to space. So there's not much with Congress in recess for the next 2 weeks until the 24th is when they're reconvening, with the 28th being the big day. If a budget is not, or a CR is not, continuing resolution for those who don't know, is not passed by April 28th, we're going to have another government shutdown, which means no work for people in the government and people near the government. But that's an aside. The big thing coming up in the next 2 weeks, everyone needs to go to one. March for Science. We're in an era, if you've read my editorial on elemental.fm, or talk to me in real life, or talk to Newton in real life, you will understand just how much science and space exploration mean to us.
Or if you listen to any of the recent podcasts.
or if you listen to the latest in Washington any week of the last,
especially 4 weeks. Like the last episode.
last episode we got a little politically charged there. But I mean, science is, the fact that science is as polarizing as it is right now, that there's one side, our side, that understands the scientific method, understands that it's a process, that it's probably as close to unbiased or neutrally biased as possible, that it's objective, that it's deliberate, that it's well thought out. There's that side, there's us. And then there's another side who views science as an attack on their interests, on their money, on the companies that line their pockets, that see science as an affront to them because it doesn't agree with their talking points. That when they're in power, they choose to attack the budget of science programs. Now, these are not the only organizations that do science, but the federal government is the only entity in the United States that can invest in scientific pursuits
high risk,
and not be high risk, high reward, and not be beholden to a group of stakeholders or a board of directors or some higher power that has a bias. I mean, the federal government has that ability. I mean, there's a reason why, the Apollo program didn't have the Northrop Grumman logo on the side or the Lockheed Martin logo on the side. It was the American flag because it was fully funded and operated by the United States of America's government. Science needs to not be a partisan issue. It has not been so in the past. And we have seen great strides on Capitol Hill in support of science and space exploration. I mean, every time I go on the Hill and talk to members of Congress, Republican or Democrat, we can all sit there and geek out about the latest thing SpaceX did. Or, oh, did you see this new thing about Mars? Oh, there's these potentially habitable planets only 39 light years away. I mean, you can go and have that conversation with any member of Congress, basically. But as we get more polarized and as we get more political, where science becomes a political stand and not just a stand for justifiable evidence of things that are happening to your planet, to your species, to the cosmos, when we get to that point, we start to recede. I mean, the progression of humanity starts to recede once you get to that point where science is seen as an affront, because it is not in line with the special interests or not in line with the big donors to your campaign. So that is why I'm marching for science. We will be talking about this nonstop, I'm sure, into the march and during the march and after the march. This is not, as much as we like to rag on the administration or the Republicans, we have friends on both sides of the aisle who support science. We have people on both sides of the aisle who don't support science, more so on one side than the other, but I'll leave that be for now.
We'll talk about it later.
Yeah,
on another podcast. Yeah.
But this march, the March for Science, is nonpartisan. I want to stress it. Like, as much as I want it to be, a giant middle finger to the Trump administration, it's not, because it's bigger than that. Science is bigger than any terrestrial conflict we can muster up, whether it's, rich versus poor, black versus white. Science is so much bigger than everything else, I think. And it needs to hold a place of precedence within our government, because the government is the only way that we're going to be able to get these things done. Private enterprise cannot be as objective and sensible as the government can be if science is taken seriously. So this is a pro-science, not anti-administration march, to show that there are hundreds of thousands, there are millions of people out there who support science as the backbone of our economy, of research, of defense, of basically every aspect of American and earthling life depends on science.
I'm just going to take a couple minutes, because I know we're really running out of time here. And I'll probably go on a longer rant next week. The one thing I will say, as sort of a counter to something that you did mention, is that science has always been political. Science, whenever something flies in the face of common public thinking, there is typically a group that screams out against it. If you guys don't believe me, ask Galileo. I know that's a little unfair because Galileo's long dead, but
a couple hundred years, little.
But there has always been confrontation with the political order when it's come to science. And I think really where it becomes a problem is when leadership enforces a mentality about science as if science was only being done in a way that was driven by ideology rather than by evidence. And when that political leadership takes advantage of a populace that, quite frankly, is becoming known as a full-on United States. I'm not talking about Republican or Democrat. I'm saying as the full-on United States, a populace that is becoming known worldwide for having just a massive lack of understanding when it comes to mathematics and science. That's when things start to get dangerous. When those that have become elected officials start to play on those biases, those superstitions, and that ignorance, quite frankly. And I'm not saying that as in an insulting way, but when it begins to play on the ignorance of the public that was caused by a pretty bad education system, quite frankly, that's when this becomes dangerous. When those in charge stand on a pulpit and shout something that they know is not true, in order to advance their cause, that is what we're taking issue with here, and that's honestly what I'm marching against.
Well said. You said that. I agree with you. I guess I will redact my earlier statement that science hasn't always been political, and I make mention of that in my editorial post, and I'm sure I'll make mention of it again. I mean, you're right. Science has been, so long as it's been a counter to the norm, counter to the usual way of doing things, it has been a political activity, but it hasn't been as polarized as it has now. So driven on by ideological lines. Yeah. And you bring up a very good point, and it drives me insane to no end of the educational system. I mean, I went to public school. Yeah. You went to public school. Yeah. I mean, there is a problem with science literacy and mathematics literacy in this country. And that's why we're marching.
Yeah, absolutely. One more thing before we leave. And I want to point this out. The whole idea behind this march was actually inspired by the 2017 Women's March that occurred on January 21st. I want to give credit where credit's due. It was discussed on Reddit thereafter, but the women kicked this thing off, this movement off, and I just wanted to make sure that we credit them for that. So,
geez, women are taking over the world. The future is female, if I can use the buzzwords.
I wish one took over the United States. And on that note.
Also, just April 22nd. I don't think we mentioned the date for the March for Science.
Oh, yeah.
So if you just sat through these rants and didn't know what day it was, I'm so sorry.
April 22nd, and the festivities get started at the National Mall at around 8 a.m. That's when the Facebook event at least states that things are getting started.
Yeah, so I know a little bit more on that. There's some workshops and teach-ins in the morning at 8 a.m. I think the march is like the rally starts at 10, and then the actual marching through the streets of Washington starts at 2 p.m.
Yeah. So I think there's going to be a ton of people there, because at the Women's March, that was barely planned. This one, people have had time to get their tickets, fly out, and prepare for this thing. So I think it's going to be more like a stand and shout than a march.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't expect your cell phone to work in any capacity.
The servers will be not servers. The towers will be overloaded. All right, Newton. 1 hour and 38 minutes.
Okay.
A new record.
I think we did. I think we have.
I think it is time to sign off. Remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We don't have a Snapchat yet, but we should. Elemental.fm. Sign up for the email list so you get all of our updates. And we will see you next week.
And comment, leave reviews. We want to know what you guys like, what you don't like about the podcast. So please comment on any of the social medias or on iTunes. And leave us a 5-star review.
Topics. Yeah. And suggest topics. Yes. We need that too.
Yes.
All right. As always, I'm Jack.
I'm Newton. Ad Astra.